hearing the responses to the last few questions. And it's really, I suppose what I would warn against is lapsing into a kind of reverse Orientalism. I think it's important not to set up Eastern and Western medical systems, and I use the term systems quite loosely, as being things which are irredeemably different from one another. And although I think it's clear that, particularly say from the late 19th century onwards, Western medicine became far more reductionist in its outlook, it never became completely so. And I think it's also important to remind ourselves of those holistic features of the Western medical tradition, which were very much alive, say, up until the, say, at least the middle part of the 19th century, and which nevertheless continued even through its most reductionist phase in the late 19th, early 20th century. And just, I suppose, in another way, I kind of want to put in a good word for the Greeks. I mean, the ancient Greek medicine was very different from the Chinese traditional medicine that we've learnt about today, and also from the Indian tradition. But it wasn't entirely reductionist. It was analytical in the sense that it broke down problems into constituent parts, in the sense that it looked in more detail and with a certain amount of accuracy from a kind of modern point of view at certain parts of the body. But it was also concerned to stress the interaction between these parts, and also the interaction between the body and the environment more generally. And the notion of disease that the Greeks had, indeed, which was current in Western medicine really up to the 19th century, was that it was basically imbalance. Disease was dis-ease. It was an imbalance of the system. It was a way of describing a disequilibrium. It was a way of describing how the body had been upset, and which was observable through symptoms that the patient displayed. But it was really the underlying causes of those symptoms, the imbalance, that the Greeks were trying to get at and to rectify. And each individual, according to the Greeks, was born with a slightly different constitution. Some individuals were born with constitutions which were imbalanced almost from the start, and they had to follow quite a strict regimen to try and correct that. But imbalance could arise from any number of things, from what you inherit in your body, from your lifestyle, and also from broader environmental influences. So it wasn't really a reductionist approach. And I think that there's a lot of similarity, actually, between Western medicine up until the late 19th century and Chinese traditional medicine, and also the Indian medical tradition. And even after Western medicine enters its reductionist phase, after the discovery of pathogens in the so-called germ theories of disease of the late 19th century, there's still a kind of counter tendency there, which stresses that disease or the pathogens can only thrive in favourable soil, and the soil being used so often as a metaphor for the body. In other words, the degree to which the body was able to deal with infection. It's, what the factors affecting immunity were also still considered to be important. And when people began to understand more about how diseases were transmitted, for instance, by vectors, ecology, say in the 1920s and 30s, had also a kind of balancing effect. And so there was still a kind of holistic tendency within Western medicine. And I think it's important to bear in mind these similarities, and also to bear in mind that, at least to some extent, that these different medical systems weren't closed systems, that they were to some degree interactive. They had interconnected histories. So, for instance, speaking about a context that I know more, say in India, that if you look at the evolution of so-called Islamic or Unani medicine over the last few hundred years, and of Indian medicine, Ayurveda, then you can see that how they interact with one another, and how very often, for instance, you'd have Hindu practitioners of Unani medicine, and also how in the 19th and 20th centuries both of these traditions took on elements of the Western medical tradition. So what I would like to stress, and I think it's important because it's a metaphor for human society in general, is although we need to be aware of the differences, and obviously these different traditions have their strengths, we also need to be aware of our common heritage and how much our different cultures also have in common.
Thank you very much. That's a very helpful overview. It does demonstrate that we need historians to understand the context of ideas. And I wish in medical school that we had a better appreciation of this wider field of vision. It's badly lacking. We're coming to the end of this event. It's been an extraordinary day where we've gone from China to India to Greece to the West, back again. Such an interplay of themes and cultures, and as someone said, multi-layered, multi-leveled. I've certainly learned an enormous amount, and I do hope that the Shen Foundation will offer further conferences like this so that we can deepen our understanding and find the right kind of collaboration to pull together in the face of what we're hearing about today. I mean, this swine flu epidemic now may be just a prelude, just a blip in compared with things that may face humanity in the next few years, and how important to be prepared in advance and not wait until the disaster befalls us. And while we can understand that public health officials, medical officers and health and so on, are promoting programs of vaccination, we also know that every intervention like that carries risk. Now it's up to each individual to make their assessment of whether or not they want to enter into that risk, and whether we individually get vaccinated or advise our families or our children to or not. What we have to be is as well informed as possible, and part of being well informed is to have a knowledge of what else is available, particularly medicines that nature offers us, which don't have any side effects. So it's really helpful then to know about these other practices coming from the East, not in an oppositional sense, but as Mark says, as part of having a fuller understanding of what's available for us to avail ourselves of. Meditation, Qigong, traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture. And a theme that's come across from our speakers today, how enormously important to be happy. Of the risk factors in cardiovascular disease, we know about lipids, we know about the role of anxiety and stress and so on. And we know about genetic predispositions, but there's an enormous area which is really uncharted. We don't understand what those variables are, although we're beginning to understand that happiness is probably the single most important protective factor. To live with joy in the heart is probably the best medicine of all. And I think our speakers have communicated this in a very knowledgeable and well-informed way, and I'm so grateful to them for coming. So what I'd like to do as we close today is first to just ask Bizong, the director of the Shen Foundation, to come and say a few words, and also Chi Tung. Is Chi here? Chi? Can you go and find Chi for us? Thank you. Because aside from thanking our speakers, which I know we're going to do again in a moment, there are many people who've worked enormously hard behind the scenes to put this conference on. As I said before, all done entirely